All right. Are we ready to begin then? I guess it's being recorded now. Correct, Dave? You're muted.
Yes, we have it live now.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you here tonight. Public, Planning Commission, City Council, and staff. We're grateful you could all join us. This is sort of a maiden voyage to see how this is going to work, but I just want to let you know that Governor Herbert, he made an executive order to allow cities to continue to hold their public meetings, but do it electronically. That's to help us to continue to do city business, but also protect people from the spread of coronavirus. So we're here tonight and we'd like to welcome everyone. I believe we have most people in attendance, with the exception of maybe Wes Johnson. I think everyone else from the Planning Commission and Council is here. So we will begin. This is the joint City Council Planning Commission meeting of March 24th, 2020, and it is now 6:01 p.m. We'll begin with a Pledge of Allegiance by Councilman Windsor, and then I will give a prayer. Councilman Windsor, wait until the flag's on the screen.
Everyone, please rise. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stand here. Dear Father in heaven, we're grateful to be able to meet this night under difficult circumstances. We're grateful that we're able to meet as a city, and we ask for thy spirit to be with us as we conduct business in this city and work to do our best to make good decisions on behalf of the citizens here. Father, at this time, we're concerned about our neighbors and friends and those around us, and also at a distance, and pray that thou wilt bless all those who are serving to help those in need. Father, please help us to weather this storm well, to be able to get the needed resources, and bless all those who are providing help, who are providing protection and safety for us, that they may be watched over and blessed with health and strength. Father, again, we're grateful for this opportunity and pray for thy help this evening. Please give us guidance and direction. In thy Son's name, amen.
Amen.
All right. So before I turn the time over to David Larson, who's our city manager, I just wanted to publicly thank Gary Boatwright for all his tireless work on editing our general plan narrative. He's worked a lot with the syntax in that narrative and spent a lot of time, and we'd like to tell him how much we appreciate all his hard work with that and thank him for that. So thank you, Gary.
You're welcome.
So the format is the same in all meetings. Obviously, we can't have public comment at this meeting, but we wouldn't anyway because this is our Planning Commission and Council joint meeting. We're here to discuss the general plan and also mixed use. And so I will now turn the time over to David Larson to begin that discussion.
Thanks, Mayor. The first topic of conversation tonight is mixed use, and the committee that was put together, the mixed use committee with representatives of the council, the Planning Commission, and staff, has gotten together multiple times and ultimately has brought forward a recommendation for consideration tonight. You've read that in the packet, the summary of it. I'll briefly explain the recommendation and then turn over the time to the committee members if they'd like to add or clarify anything that I've missed. Long story short, the committee has reviewed lots of different options. They've looked at ways to create mixed use as an overlay, mixed use as a base zone, mixed use in some type of a development plan, master development plan or area development plan, as well as the idea of having no mixed use at all and just sticking only to the base zoning. The committee recommendation for everybody's consideration is to not have mixed use as an overlay or as a base zone, to simply require on the two areas that have been identified on the general plan projected land use map, which is one area on the east side of town, one area on the west side of town, that those areas be designated as requiring a development plan and a development agreement, but not having any mixed use, not having residential on those properties, just sticking with the commercial as the base zone. Understanding that the developers so far to this point have requested residential on those properties so that they could quote unquote make it pencil, that they could have a return on their investment. The committee looked at the idea of, instead of having mixed use, meaning instead of having residential on those commercial properties, to have some other type of tool in order for there to be the ability to develop the commercial, to have that return on investment or pencil, so to speak, for the developer. If it does not pencil, if there's not a return, then there's no investment. And so there would be no development. With that being said, I've had some conversations with the developers that are looking at both of those pieces of property and brought up this concept of no mixed use and replacing that with incentives. I'm happy to share some of those specific conversations once we get into the discussion. But as that concept is concerned of no mixed use, but instead the city participate in some way to provide an incentive and bridge that gap so that those properties remain completely commercial into the future. That's the recommendation that is being brought forward from the committee. With that being said, let me ask the rest of the committee to clarify that description. I'm sure that I left things out based on how people felt those conversations went. I'll turn the time over then to committee members if they'd like to speak. I see Taylor's hand is up first.
So I was hoping to clarify one point on that. I'm not sure if I got the perception that we were okay with just saying no residential at all in those zones. I thought we were going to utilize the opportunity to have some kind of discussion about development rights buyout or using our taxes as an incentive to development for the types of residential uses that we did not like. And I'm a little concerned by saying that we're taking out all residential use out of these zones. I feel like we're losing a little bit of a bargaining chip when we have these conversations with developers.
Other committee members would like to clarify any of their thoughts?
As I recall, we did say we didn't want the residential in there, if I recall that correctly. So I'm a little bit in conflict with you there on that, Taylor. As I recall, it was no residential, but still bring us what you got.
So again, I just don't know what kind of proposals we'll get, and I'm hopeful that maybe Dave can shed some light on what kind of conversations he's had with the developers about what they think about this, and if it's something that they would be looking to move forward on a proposal with us.
I see Wayne's hand and then Blair's.
Yeah, I would collide with what Rob was saying. From my perspective, we weren't wanting to have any residential in those areas. It didn't fit a mixed use. At least the definition of mixed use that we were trying to put together was more for properties of the hundreds of acres, not the tens to 20s of acres. It just didn't work, but we wanted them to come forward with a development plan that we can discuss. Yeah, putting apartments on there or multiplex family homes was not what I saw that we wanted. We wanted those properties to be commercial.
I mean, I guess I'm curious why we don't want any residential on there. To me, that would soften some of the commercial, or some of the residential would soften that commercial if we don't want tons of, I mean, I've heard it both ways from neighboring people of those properties. Are we saying no residential whatsoever on those properties? Is that what we're getting from the committee?
Yes, that was how I understood it, that the committee was recommending no residential. Instead of residential, having a different conversation with the developers on those properties to provide other types of financing tools in order to make it work. At some point, somebody would have to take the risk to put money up front in order to build on the property. There's very little risk in building residential. There's much higher risk in building commercial when there's not a business that's already identified that wants to go there. That type of building is called speculation building. So commercial building on spec.
Well, going back to Taylor's point, if you absolutely say none, what if they bring you a proposal that actually we may like? I mean, you're limiting yourselves by saying none, period. I mean, what if it's something that's beneficial on one of those pieces of property or another piece of property? Do we really want to limit that? I mean, we don't have to say yes to it if we don't want any of it, but why do we want to limit that? Just let them bring the proposals they bring and we can say yes or no.
I'm just going to jump in here, Blair. It's managing expectations from my perspective. Why put it out there that we might consider apartments or multifamily housing if the right proposal comes along, when really there's not much of an opportunity for that? I'd rather put forth something that is.
Well, I mean, where I disagree
projecting those
is,
areas to be.
yeah, where I disagree, Wayne, is just that, like on the piece of property, the Stevens piece of property, are we pushing them to go more a box or a flying J, a truck stop if we limit that? Are we? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Would we be pushing them to go that route? And I'm just throwing that out there. Because we've always entertained that.
What we're saying is, rather than using apartments to make it pencil out economically for them, that we look at other incentives that the city might have to encourage full commercial or the various commercial options that would come forward, rather than use housing and putting 100 or 150 or even 200 units within a 10 to 20 acre lot. One of the hardships I had was look at either one of these areas. It's an entry into the city, and can you see walking in or driving into the city upwards of 100 to 200 apartments as soon as you come in? In some areas, it just doesn't fit the vision that I see going forward. So
Yeah,
it's not in my. Sorry,
you go ahead. Finish your thought. I apologize.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
I was just going to make mention that I keep hearing the word apartments, and that's fine. I think we agreed on that point. But are we willing to allow different other types of residential use within these zones? Would we consider duplexes? Would we consider townhomes? Would we consider others? And I think that's my bigger concern. If we're just going to say no to all residential, we lose a major bargaining chip in all this. If a developer were to propose something, and even if it's something that we don't like, that's our leverage point to say we don't like apartments, but we know that that's going to be something that makes it pencil for you. Therefore, we can offer you these tax increment financing or whatever it is that we decide for this development area.
I noticed that Haley has her hand ready to go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm trying to remember when I rose my hand on for what reason, but what you're saying, Taylor, I feel like most times when we spoke with the developers that brought forth their proposal, the number that we were knocking around in there was so far removed from where we were thinking in the committee, where I don't think it could pencil with a lower density or with a different kind of housing, is kind of what the feedback we were getting. But additionally, you know, just because we say no housing, am I wrong? If they can always bring something forward still, and we can look into it as well, rather than, I feel like as a developer, they wanted more direction. So if we're pretty much going to say, or probably going to say no to having that residential in, isn't it more beneficial for them to know that that's probably not going to happen rather than hoping that's going to happen and then bring forth proposal after proposal that we say no to? Or how does that work, Dave?
You bring up a good point. I think the idea we had initially was if we put pen to paper and developed a zone or an overlay that defined mixed use, then a developer would know what the rules of engagement are, so to speak. They'd be able to see that on the books and know what the target is. What we have right now on the books is simply base zones. We have commercial, we have R7, we have all the single family zones, we have various zones. A developer can always bring forward a proposal that is outside the scope of those zones. And then the city would have the ability, the planning commission and the city council, to review those. What we've identified in the projected land use map that we put in the packet was identified these two project areas, these two pieces of property on either end of town, and identified that we're requiring a development agreement and a development plan. And essentially it's what Taylor and Blair and Wayne have kind of discussed a little bit, and what you're bringing up is that a developer could come forward and request to put residential of some type along with other types of uses, and the city would be able to review that and identify whether or not they like it or not. There's just no entitlement that the city would be putting pen to paper. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is by not creating an overlay, by not creating a base zone, by not identifying this is an area of mixed use, then there's no entitlement there. It's simply if they bring forward a proposal and a development agreement and a development plan, that could be considered on the whole. I noticed Quinn has his hand ready to go. I don't hear you, Quinn. Did anybody?
Quinn doesn't even show a mic, I don't think.
Quinn, is your mic not connected? Well, now it's muted. Now it's not muted. I know last time when we tested this, you had the headset on. So is that where the mic would be coming in? While we're waiting for Quinn, Blair, I notice your hand is up.
Yeah, I think maybe you answered my question, Dave, or my question or comment. The concern I had was we were saying they couldn't even bring it in to a development agreement. I agree that we shouldn't state it in our commercial or that commercial highway zone for sure. And then just let them bring whatever proposals they bring and let us review them. Is my thought.
Okay. Haley, your hand's up.
Yeah, I just bring up Blair's point where you just get, just like a truck stop there, or just one piece of commercial over that 17 acres. That's something we also discussed in the committee, that kind of making it some sort of kind of like a planned unit, multi-commercial area. Did we go any further with that to make sure to avoid that happening?
Wouldn't we have to change that, address that in our code specifically to not allow it? Because right now we just state, Barry can correct me if I'm wrong, fuel stops or fuel stations or something like that are allowed, which we don't necessarily want to limit it. Like a convenience store or the gas station is fine. It's the truck stops that I think bothers me personally anyway.
Yes, we would have to make a change to our code as it sits right now, or because it does allow those kinds of uses.
Barry, didn't we discuss though, calling this property A and B and talking about how to kind of avoid that situation? I thought we discussed this in there. I just can't remember what.
Yes, we did discuss that. That was when we were initially looking at a mixed use zone and what that zone would look like. We wanted to customize the permitted uses and conditional uses a little bit to each area. And so we were going to have an A and a B so we could distinguish between the two, or a east and a west, whatever. But that was before the committee made the recommendation not to have a mixed use zone. So if at this point we're still concerned about the uses in that zone, we're going to have to amend the CH zone.
Well, I think that's when we started discussing if we need to amend the CH zone. And then it was kind of decided that we wouldn't need to.
Well, one of the reasons we wouldn't need to right now is because the property isn't currently zone CH.
That's right.
There still would need to be a rezone. There is a piece of property, a portion of the property on the west side of town that is already CH, but not all of it. And so those underlying uses that are already written in the zoning code, once it's already zoned like that, then those uses are permitted. But when there's a rezone that needs to take place, that can be more dependent on the development plan that's proposed, and the development agreement, I should say. Both of those documents would be able to address that. I noticed Rob has his hand raised.
You hear me now? Got me?
Yep.
So two things that come to mind. One is on both properties, the way I understand it, and if I'm wrong, tell me, but on property A and property B, it has to be, when the development agreement comes in, it has to be a design for the entire piece of property, not just one little piece. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the other thing is I know we've been talking about residential. I don't think we said we totally eliminate it, but we don't want to advertise it. Is that a better way to say that?
I think that's an important clarification that we should restate for everybody. What I'm hearing the committee say is that in the recommendation, it is, we're not going to define mixed use. We're going to leave it as these areas require a development plan and a development agreement. And then that allows the conversation of what's an appropriate level of residential, perhaps none at all. But we're not advertising, we're not codifying, we're not allowing mixed use by ordinance or anything like that. It's simply if they require that, requires the wrong word. If a developer requests that, that can be discussed and considered. Taylor?
I was just going to mention that exact same thing, that I felt like we're really widening up the apparatus here to get development proposals coming in, and use the creativity within the development community to get us something that we feel like is a good fit and vision for what South Weber is. So that's kind of why I was surprised that we would limit it right out front.
All right, thank you. It sounds like the committee has clarified that stance and that recommendation. Anybody else, do you have any questions to the committee regarding this general recommendation?
So Dave, I'm just gonna try to do a mic check. Can you hear me now?
Yes, great, Quinn.
Okay. Yeah, I got it fixed. The only question, comment I had, I think was just, it was clarified earlier, whether or not we are specifically writing out residential.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions for the committee? All right. This isn't usually what I do, but the mayor's asked me to kind of operate this way. The mayor would be the one that would ask whether or not I mean, this is just a discussion. It's not an action item necessarily. But what I hear, if I had to summarize, is that the group is okay with this recommendation as it is put on the general plan maps, showing those two properties with a crosshatch that shows in the key in the legend that they require a development agreement and a development plan for those properties. If anybody is saying no to that and they disagree with that, now's the time. Otherwise, we will move to the next item of discussion.
So Dave, this is Barry. To clarify just a little bit, we've got some references in the text of the general plan about mixed use. Sounds like we're going to take those references out, but talk specifically about the two different properties and about the need for an area master plan for those areas before they can be developed. Is that, do I have that correct?
Yes, the narrative as it's in the packet right now removed a couple of paragraphs that specifically talked about mixed use, but we need to probably put some specification around that concept of the development plan and the development agreement on those areas so that that's in the narrative, in the text as well. It's on the projected land use map that was in the packet as well, but not necessarily in the narrative. So we may want to add a paragraph that specifically identifies those and calls that out so that there's an explanation. Taylor, I see your hand.
I just wanted to clarify one other thing. In our discussions, we talked about putting these into like a redevelopment area or having a special designation for these areas so that we could potentially set up these tax increment financing deals. And is that what we should be using in the master plan to call these out?
We wouldn't need to call these out in the master plan. Those would come about on a case-by-case basis as needed.
Sorry, maybe I'm not understanding. On a case-by-case basis. Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Meaning that when the development proposal comes forward, when the development plan and agreement all comes forward, if there's a discussion about incentives, if there's a request for incentives, at that point, the city would have to go through the process to establish the community development area and the tool that is in order to provide the incentive. We don't need to preemptively create the incentive tool or the incentive area. We do that as a reaction once the development proposal comes forward and we work through that. That's what I meant by case by case.
Yeah, that makes sense now. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments regarding mixed use? Okay, well then, if the mayor gives me the head nod or the yes, I'll move on to the next item of discussion. And that is the general plan narrative and the maps. I know that everybody had access to those in the packet, has had the chance to review the edits for clarification and simply for readability that Gary worked so diligently on. I know that he spent long hours and a lot of time to do that. huge shout out to Gary for taking the time to make that happen. It was really, really well done. So because everybody's had the chance to look at it, rather than me go line by line or section by section or map by map, the question is, are these ready for the second round of public comment?
Dave, just one thing that I noticed in there, and it's not really a content based, but somehow the graphics that we put in there for showing different residential densities,
Uh-huh.
each of the graphics got duplicated.
Oh, okay.
So we just need to make sure we fix that.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. Anybody? Oh, Quinn.
I just had two questions. On page 7, just to clarify, when we are talking about the added dwelling units, we're saying at the bottom of page 7, they added 2260 existing to the approved dwellings with 1,042 dwelling units. That 2260 included proposed plots that haven't been approved yet. So the assumption is those 1,042 is from everything else that hasn't been proposed yet. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the only other comment I had was on page 10. It's a minor thing, but we talk about Hill Air Force Base being directly south of South Weber. I think it's more directly southwest of South Weber, but not a big
Okay.
issue.
On line 320.
Yes.
Okay, I see that.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else with comments on the narrative or the maps? Wayne?
Yeah, you changed the format, so I can't raise my hand on here, so I'll raise it visually.
Okay.
Thanks, Quinn, for starting it out. I didn't want to be the first one, but seems to me, when you read lines 276 through 289, we talk about steep slopes, and it discusses the negatives of developing on steep slopes, namely on the south bench area of the city. But when you move to section 6 under annexation, promoting the development and need for municipal services. And it also talks about preserving the character of the community by isolating to foster cohesiveness. If the plan to plan for any development in that annexation in or along the south bench, that won't foster isolation, and it's kind of contrary to the steep slope discussion. So my question, I guess, is the narrative in the annexation part is referring to globally all annexation, but I think the rules are different for the annexation to the south part of the city versus maybe the other areas. I don't know if there needs to be a clarification. I think there needs to be some clarification or some distinction between the two, because developing that south bench is contrary to some of the other statements we made in the document.
So you'd like some clarification on the development of this or the annexation of the South Bench area rather than just a broad statement about annexation in general.
I believe we need some clarification along those lines. If we're talking about steep slopes and how they are fragile and sensitive lands and not good for development, and that the south bench is part of our annexation area. I know there's some flat parts up on top, but it is kind of contrary to the global discussion under annexation, in my opinion.
How should we clarify that then? That we're talking specifically about development on the bench area and not the slope? What's the thought in how we clarify that?
I think it's more for a group discussion, but me personally, I think the whole south area that we annex is to remain an open space, flat and or slopes. I don't personally believe it should be developed or needs to be developed or wants to be developed. There are a myriad of reasons why, but that's where I'm coming from. But the council may have different views on that.
I'm gonna look over at the projected land use map because I think that tells us what the use would be in terms of development. You know, annexation is simply to become part of city boundaries. The development side,
The map already shows it to be open space, that gray area, if you look at the legend.
right.
So your annexation discussion does not lead itself to what we're projecting that to be.
So we need to identify that although it's on the annexation map to become part of the city, we're not necessarily projecting a use other than open lands for that south slope area.
Well, it's also for the east bench as well. You look at the
Oh, true.
annexation to the east and the same applies.
Okay. We can add some explanation there. Is that the same that everybody feels that we need that as well? Taylor, I see your hand.
I'm good. Never mind.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back to the full screen with everybody. Any other, oh, Michelle, I see that you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering where the information is that you're showing up on the screen. Where does that come from? Because I went on the city website to get the packet, and it has the red line version of the master plan. So I was just wondering, was that sent in an email?
I think, Michelle,
I-
if you scroll down further,
Uh-huh.
you have the red line version, and then you've got the version without the changes shown. And they have different lines. So when we're talking about lines, it's on which line certain things are on. It's on the one without the changes shown.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Okay,
Thanks.
I'll take my hand down now, okay?
All right. Any other, Taylor, I see your hand up.
I'm just looking over the active transportation map. And is this the first time that we've had future sidewalks labeled on this map?
Brandon, can you speak to that? I don't believe that it does specifically call out future sidewalks, but Brandon, do you want to address that?
Hold on just a minute. I'm looking at it.
Here, I can also bring it up so everybody can see that.
It's the purple color, both existing and proposed.
It does show existing sidewalk and future sidewalk.
My only question on that is, why are we not showing future sidewalk along South Weaver Drive?
That's a good question. We could add it. We should add it.
Okay. In the areas where South Weber Drive does not have sidewalk currently,
Yeah.
request is to add future sidewalk designation. Okay,
To that same question, I'm trying to get to it on my map, but it seemed like we had some odd ones, like going towards the gravel pit, we show a sidewalk. and over 89. I guess that's already existing. So I'm just curious. I just don't recall seeing this layer before, seeing future and proposed sidewalks. So
Yeah, it's been there before. I mean, it's always been there. The idea was just to show it on areas, usually where there's a future road, to just indicate the connectivity of the sidewalk. But it doesn't show any of the existing. It's just trying to show the highlighted areas where we want to make sure that a sidewalk is provided at some point.
So would it make sense to take out of the legend of the existing sidewalk?
I don't recall if there's some areas where we felt like it was important to show the existing.
I think that we do, like in this area here on Canyon Drive, that does show that it's existing sidewalk in that area because it's around the trailhead. I think.
Right,
that-
and connectivity to the park.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that was, sorry, I think that was the general idea, was to be able to show connectivity to parks via either a trail or sidewalk.
that little explanation helps me understand why we're showing it in places that we are.
But we can take another look at that to make sure that it seems consistent across the board, if that's why we're showing it.
Okay. We'll add that element to it. Double check the sidewalk on the transportation map, active transportation map. Hayley, I see your hand up.
I think Rob was first if he wants to go.
Oh, I see Rob now too. Thanks, Hayley.
My question goes back to what Councilman Windsor was talking about with the annexation. I'm not sure I understand what he's driving at. What are we trying to achieve?
With what specifically?
Well, is it open space and that's what we want to leave it because that's what it is today? Or is there any active, anything else to be developed there? If I don't understand what's it going to be?
The discussion previously was that would remain open space, that we are projecting that use as open space.
Okay, all the way up to the flat?
Yeah, let me show that map. The gray area is the open space. And it shows it on the south area and it shows it on the east area.
So my question is, why in the world would we, why would we ever annex open space?
Well, if we don't annex open space and our neighbors do annex, it may not remain open space. I thought it was more of a idea to protect it in that way.
That was the discussion, was we wanted to have control over that land and not let someone else make the land use decisions on it.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but what I'm asking is, it's already open space and we leave it open space, which I'm not opposed to that, but I don't know if our neighbors to the south of us would think that was a good idea, and they would try to take it if we don't annex it right now as open space, right?
Well, they might try and take it, but in either case, the annexation is pretty much in the hands of the property owners. They have to do that by petition of the property owners. So first, that's got to happen. Of course, it could happen. They could propose an annexation to Layton City. In that case, and they could do that even if, regardless of what happens here, I guess they would have that as an option. But that puts us in a position to protest the annexation if they were to do that.
So you've answered my question then is I want to be able to control what goes on top. And if this is the best way to control that, I'm good with that. But I don't know if other people would see it our way.
Yeah, some may not, but we don't have the power to unilaterally go out there and annex that property. It has to be by request of the property owner, at least a majority of the property owners.
Okay. Okay.
Haley?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a quick question on that point, Barry. If they were to annex in and it's under open lands, do they have, and we accept that annexation, do they have the ability to rezone it as well and take it as a new rezone request, basically? Yeah.
Well, certainly they have the right to request a rezone, but it's our general plan that's going to guide what we allow as land uses there. We don't have to approve their request.
So that's, I would argue that this actually gives us more control over what goes there rather than less.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yeah,
then,
Absolutely.
They go to another city.
well, but the thing about that is I'm not sure Layton can service some of those areas of that. So it wouldn't really make sense for Layton to serve those areas.
And even if we have overlapping annexation areas in our plans, there's not real trouble with that necessarily. It just means that both cities have thought about annexing it. They have somewhat of a claim to annex it. So if it makes it so one city can't act without the other city's knowledge, so to speak. That, Barry used the word to dispute it. That if the property owners did go to Layton, well, we could make a very clear argument that that's on our annexation plan as well. And so we'd be part of the conversation. You're right that there is more flexibility there. Blair, you had your hand up, and then Gary had his hand up.
Mine's not about annexation. If Gary has something on annexation, I'll let you finish that first.
Okay.
So I'm just looking through this annexation section, and everybody's talking about it remaining open space, but there's a section that talks about development and who will pay for the development of the infrastructure specifically. I think if we're planning on keeping it open space, we need to say that explicitly clear in the narrative, not just on the map as well. And I may be reading that different than others, but that's how I'm reading it right now.
Well, that's how I understood Wayne's comment, is that we needed to clarify that in the narrative, in the annexation portion, so that we describe that East Bench and South Bench area that, although is in the annexation map, we are identifying it as open land in the projected land use map. So
Okay.
I think you're saying the same thing. We need to clarify that.
Okay, I think we are. Thanks.
Okay.
Could I clarify something here about the East Bench? We show a good portion of that East Bench in open space, but there is a portion of it that is annexable, or is developable, I mean. And I just wanted to make sure that we understand that not the entire area there is undevelopable. I think the area that's in gray is pretty much, that's the undevelopable portion, but there's some to the west of that is.
Good point. Haley and Taylor, I see both of your hands raised. Is it about annexation?
Mine's about something different. So Taylor, you can go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure we understand that if both cities, Layton and South Weaver, decided to annex this into their general plan or whatever, wouldn't it become the developer or the property owner's best interest to go with the highest and best use? So if our goal is to have control over what goes up there, and Layton City has that as, let's just say, at an airport terminal or some kind of industrial complex, and we have it as open space, are we really being competitive? I just don't see a scenario where somebody's going to say, I want to annex into South Weaver because I want this property to remain open space. If they're going to annex into any city, it's because they want to make money. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong in that thought.
I don't know if you're wrong in that thought, but ultimately, property owners are the ones that kind of instigate the process for annexation. And we're just simply, as cities, saying we're interested in that conversation. Barry, do you have more to say to that idea?
Yeah, state statute provides for kind of an arbitration, not really an arbitration. I guess it's more like it's like a quasi judicial body. It's called the Boundary Commission, and the county operates that Boundary Commission. In the case of some kind of annexation dispute, particularly where there's an overlap in their annexation policies, and then the entity that's not being requested to be annexed into can protest the annexation, as can any other affected taxing entity, even the school district or a mosquito abatement district or anybody else. If they felt like it was in some way injurious to them, they could protest the annexation. The question becomes, what's our case going to be like before this Boundary Commission? You know, what's our reasoning for wanting that and versus someone else wanting it more? And in my experience, because I used to be staff to that Boundary Commission, in my experience, the property owners' desires weigh pretty heavily with that group.
Thanks, Barry. Wes, did you have your hand raised? Did you have something to say regarding annexation?
Yeah, the only thing on the open space up there is we've had some landowners already say that they want to keep theirs as open and not developable. And if we can get a majority of those landowners up there to agree with that, they may want to step forward and request that they be annexed. But as far as development up there, one of the main things I think we need to be aware of is the stability of that hillside. If Layton was to go in and start developing on that hillside up there, what would be the impact of South Weaver? That would be a concern I would have if the city and Layton, we want to look at annexation and the landowners wanted to annex, which way it goes. That would probably be our best argument against Layton annexing it, is the stability.
Wes, I think you got muted partway through there at the end. Did you finish your thought?
Yeah, I think so. Just a discussion there.
Okay, thank you. I've seen a couple other hands raised, Quinn and Brandon. Is it regarding annexation as well? Quinn first, then Brandon.
Brandon was up before me. Mine's regarding annexation.
How about you go first, Quinn?
So just the annexation in general, I mean, we're talking about a whole bunch of different property owners, and I think it's hard to put one definition on all of those areas. I mean, as I'm looking at the map, you look at the northwest portion of our southern boundary, a lot of those lines go right through property owners right now. You know, because the Weaver Canal, Davis Weaver Canal goes through those properties. So maybe our annexation policy shouldn't be one broad brush that applies to everything on there. We may have to break it into sections. But the other question I had was that southern boundary of the annexation map, is that the top of the hill or the bottom of the hill? Or what's that landmark?
Brandon, did you want to speak to that?
Sure. It doesn't always follow exactly a landmark. It's just the remaining land between the current city boundary and what is owned by Hill Air Force Base. At least in that particular area.
Well, there are some other private properties in there, but it does kind of, in a general way, follow a landmark. There is a grade change there where it starts dropping off down towards South Weber. And Layton has stated that they don't feel like they can service anything that's north of that grade change. And so the line roughly follows that.
Well, Barry, just to clarify, that is true in the gray area that's on the south.
Yes.
As you head to the west, which
You want
I
me to
thought
pull
was
up
the
the
area
map?
Quinn was talking about, it's just the area between the two.
Right. To the west part of that, that's just the land between South Weber and Hill Air Force Base.
Yes. But the annexation, Dave, if you can kind of zoom in on the South Bench area. Yeah, you can kind of see where can you point out like where the city water tank is? Yeah, right there. In that area, why you see a difference in color between kind of the, I don't know, the cyan versus the blue. That's the area where Layton shows their annexation includes the cyan area. The blue areas are only shown being annexed by South Weber. So that's where there's an overlap.
This light blue area is the only place of overlap, is what you're
Yes,
saying.
but the blue dashed line through there, as Barry was explaining, yes, that roughly follows kind of the crest of the hill up to about what you can see on the screen.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It answered mine. Thank you.
Dave, I just wanted to, my comment earlier was just whatever ends up being approved as the future land use for this area is going to be what we anticipate in capital facilities plans. So if we are not anticipating any uses up there that would need any facilities, we won't be planning on that in any of our plans. So my only request would just be that I guess we put in there what we think is the most likely scenario. I'm just a little bit nervous about a future council or planning commission changing their mind on that area.
Reading between the lines a little bit, Brandon, what I hear you saying, without you saying the words, is that if we do not plan for any use up there and some future decision allows use up there, then when the developer needs to put in infrastructure and things, there's not a recouping of the cost to the same level through impact fees, because our capital facilities plan hasn't accounted for that. Is that accurate?
Yes, and it would of course depend on the different decisions made to know exactly what that impact would be. Just going back and forth between uses in an area like that that's on the upstream end of our system could be problematic if a decision is made later to change that use. And so I have obviously no concerns about it remaining open space. I just wanted to point out that is, I guess there's a risk there if a future council or planning commission decides to change that in the general plan. That would it could end up costing the existing residents. It would just depend, I guess, on the timing of it and what the proposal was and all of that. So I don't have a firm answer. I just want to throw out just kind of a little bit of a general concern if that were to change.
Thank you. Noted. Haley?
Blair, did you want to go first? I think you were before me.
I mean, I wasn't going to talk about annexation, but I do want to talk a little bit about annexation, about what Brandon was just saying, because I know it's not the politically correct thing to say, but there's been many councils that have planned that up there. I mean, and this can be changed, so we do need to be careful for that infrastructure. But I'm good with it being open space, but everybody needs to be prepared for that when they come back and tell you, I told you so. And I have another comment on the our land use, future land use map, if you'll go to that, Dave.
Okay.
So down by the soccer complex piece of property, it is currently zoned as recreational, right there where the arrow goes.
Uh-huh.
And right now, that whole piece is currently zoned as CR. Are we saying that possibly would change? Right now, it's all light blue, all the way down to that little piece going past the houses.
Yeah, so in our current zoning, so as it stands today, this is all zoned. What I'm trying to circle here, I hope you can see this little hand.
Yep.
It is all commercial recreation. The projected land use map is showing the back piece as residential. It's yellow, and the front piece, and when I mean front, I mean south, fronting South Weaver Drive, as commercial recreation. The cross hatching, if you'll notice, is cross hatching that identifies where there are building restrictions based on state easements or noise easements. And that entire property, the back piece and the front piece, the north and the south piece, is all permanently restricted. And so that's why it shows that crosshatch, even though it shows yellow.
I think that's a very good question. If I can just jump in, Blair, it would make more sense in my mind to show that as all commercial recreation, since that's how it's currently zoned, and where it's not, due to the easement restriction on it, it won't be residential.
And Brandon,
Yeah,
can you speak
that
to
was
the
my
timeline
point.
of that? Some easements have a horizon, but if I understand correctly, that easement does not have a time horizon. It's a permanent easement. Is that true?
I can't answer that for sure. I don't remember on that particular property.
Okay.
But it's also been, it's part of a development, so it's already been asked to put as commercial recreation. So should it not be that as future?
Well, there are plenty of differences between our current zoning and our projected land use map throughout the city. And
Yeah,
if we want to identify that as commercial recreation in perpetuity, then we can. What it shows right now is that we would entertain it being rezoned to residential, although we're acknowledging that there's a restriction to residential development. But if there's not a perpetual restriction there, and that somehow were to go away, right now we're showing we'd be okay with that being residential if there was no restriction. If we want to show that it is commercial recreation and we don't want there to be residential back there, then I think that's the crux of the
Yes, it should be shown as what the long-term anticipated use, whatever you feel like that is best, however that's best represented.
okay. I'm okay with that, however we want to do it. The other one I wanted is right by that piece. We have the little next to the dark blue, where that's the Castle Rock construction. we see possibly allowing in the future, I see moderate residential and stuff next to that piece of property. Are we, maybe, I guess that's part of our annexation plan, so maybe I don't really care. I just don't want to allow residential up to something we've allowed industrial next to, so we don't have another next construction type scenario.
So you're identifying the yellow, which is residential that comes up to here, and then the blue, which is industrial.
Again, that's on our annexation. I mean, that's past our city limits, so.
Yes,
Does it
but it's a good question though, Blair, because you should include anything that's in the annexation plan with some type of future land use, so that when it's annexed, we have a plan for what the use would be. So that's a good question, and maybe that's an area where there should be some type of buffer type use. I don't know what that is, but that's a good area to maybe identify that a little differently than it's currently shown.
Let me point out that the back portion of that Castle Rock property is actually in Riverdale City.
We're showing this gray
Yeah.
line, right, as the city boundary, or no?
The green
That
line
is
is,
what you're saying is,
I thought it was unincorporated county.
I think when we originally put that in there, we all thought that was unincorporated county. But someone pointed out to me, and I don't remember who, that that's actually Riverdale City. And I believe that's actually the case, it's in Riverdale.
I think you're right, Barry. I think the landowner told me that as well.
So we should
this
probably
piece is
just,
currently in Riverdale.
I'm
That's
not
what you're
positive.
Okay.
The reason that it was included is just from a service perspective. There's really
Right.
no way that Riverdale can serve that property.
yeah, I'm not saying we should take it off, because there could easily be an agreement between the cities to allow that to be in South Weaver City. Maybe we ought to consider taking the back half of that portion out of the industrial. That's an option.
Okay. Let me see if I can get back to who's got their hands raised. I see Hayley.
Does anybody else have any comments about this right now, or do we want to move on?
I don't see any. Other...
Okay, so can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I lost the feed for a minute. I don't know what happened. So I don't know where we were at in the conversation, but I just wanted to echo what Blair said. We really do need to have a projected land use, and I don't feel like industrial works well for that. And Barry was saying something when it froze and I lost connectivity. So I don't know what happened after that.
Barry, do you want to restate your idea for everybody's consideration?
Yeah, sure. I just said that one option that we could look at there, rather than having a buffer between that industrial and the adjacent residential, is to take the back half of that Castle Rock property out of industrial and put that into some other use. Now, I should also point out, I don't know, I haven't heard anything about this for a long time. At one time, Lane Cap had plans for a small industrial park in there that went clear to the freeway.
He did mention that to me at one time, and he actually talked about trying to have that whole piece be in South Weaver City as well. But that's been 2 or 3 years ago. That
What
So
can I ask?
Desire to change how that looks on the projected land use map?
I was just going to ask, does anybody see an appropriate buffer between residential and that industrial use there?
No, I don't know what to tell you to put there, but it was just a concern I had. I mean, either commercial recreation or I mean, it's hard. Or a lighter residential.
Well, we do have in our code buffer elements between commercial uses, industrial uses, and residential when they are side by side. So you can transition with various uses or with kind of the buffer as we've got. Gary, did you have an idea with this?
Well, I was just going to clarify that Riverdale is claiming that as theirs. I'm looking at their zoning map right now. So,
That it's currently in Riverdale.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Taylor?
I was just gonna mention, I think that northwest corner of that parcel anyway is gonna be within the active potential zone for Hill Air Force Base. So we would be very limited on what we could utilize it for. So I mean, that might act as natural buffer anyway.
Taylor, I think you kind of cut in and out there. Maybe that was just me. Other people might have heard you the right way, but what I heard you say is that that's in the accident potential zone, that's in the crash zone. And so there's restrictions on that property already. That
So there'd be implied restrictions, only in that the DOD likes to provide recommendations to cities on what they can and cannot do within that accident potential zone. So we're very limited in what could potentially be put there if we were to follow the recommendations from the joint land use study that's going to be going out.
That's a really good point. There is a joint land use study that is in process right now that could guide that area a little bit more once it's completed. So are you suggesting leave it as is? And once the land use study is completed, then we might be able to know what to do there?
I would think that light industrial might be one of the only zones aside from maybe commercial, or sorry, aside from maybe recreation that we could have in that area. They really like to limit the amount of people in the area, the height of the structures, and yeah, my recommendation would be wait to see what the joint land use study comes back with, and then maybe provide some recommendations to an updated general plan for that area.
Okay, thanks, Taylor. Okay, Hayley, now I think we finally can get to your new idea.
Okay, I just have a couple of questions of what happened just recently. I didn't catch anything Taylor said. It seemed like you kind of heard him. Can you review what he just said?
What I heard Taylor say is that there is a joint land use study. There is a compatible use study that is being done right now in regards to Hill Air Force Base and all of the surrounding areas. We are included in that. It is mid-process. And so if we leave the projected land use map as is for now, that industrial is most likely one of the only things that can be included in that potential crash area anyway. But that this compatible use study will provide some direction and some insight once it's completed. So if we don't change anything now and we use that a little bit as a guide once it's completed, then we'll have some more information to go on.
Okay, got it. Okay, going backwards just a little bit, back to annexation, just real quick. So it's gonna come back to this other point that I'm gonna ask about as well. But when we talk about annexating those hills, that slope area. So our CFP is done every 6 years, correct?
Our capital use plans or capital facilities plans are completed after the general plan, and it's usually about a five-year cycle of when we complete those.
Okay, so not that we want the intention of jumping back and forth and through hoops, but if in some future time there is a change among the view of the city and they want to have development up there, we have that ability to prepare for it through a CFP, even if for this plan we choose open space. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay,
Yes, that's true.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that the problem is going to be if this was on the downstream end, then it may not be that big of a deal. But where it's on the upstream end, it will if you add development, it will impact all of the downstream facilities. And if we haven't sized them accordingly, then just by doing a new plan doesn't upsize all those lines. So they would have limited capacity.
In all of our capital facilities plans, there's two things that are identified. One is the new projects, new sizing that is needed based on new development, the impacts on our current system. But the second thing is that it also identifies if there's any existing deficiency in our system. And if we don't plan for it, and then later on they change and they do need that up there, there's potential that could be identified as existing deficiency, all of that downstream that Brandon is talking about, rather than development impact. And so that's the danger.
It would just depend on what capacity, additional capacity was needed versus what was there, how much you can attribute to future development, how much would be considered existing deficiency. We just want to stay away from as much existing deficiency as possible, because that has to be paid for with the current residents. So I'm not saying that we can't do what's being proposed. I just feel like it's my job to just make you aware that those are potential implications.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. You're right that there is the ability, Hayley, as you described, that the general plan may adjust in the future and the capital facilities plans may adjust alongside it. And that's perfectly normal and that's totally okay. The real harm is if you kind of go back and forth between, well, we need the size, well, we don't need the size, well, now we need the size. So if there was some type of a yo-yo effect there, that could be the biggest trouble. Wayne, you've got your hand.
Thank you. I think we're kind of muddying the waters here, Brandon, a little bit, because up to this general plan, the previous plans had professional office spaces up there. And you went on record saying our existing capital facilities plans had identified that it didn't need to be upsized to accommodate professional office buildings. So if we go to open space, we're still good. And if we go back, we should still have that capacity, unless you're freeing up capacity for other development downstream. Sorry.
That's correct. Yes, we had planned for what was in the current general plan. And if somebody did go back to something similar to that, then it's likely there would still be the capacity. We had planned to reroute a few things in the current capital facilities plans. With this new general plan, those reroutes may not be needed. And so those would then come off. And so what I'm saying is, if it was to yo-yo back, that then we would have a capital facilities plan that's not anticipating that. So I don't have any concern right now. I just am saying I'm concerned if it were to yo-yo back, or to yo-yo back to something even more intense with residential or something like that.
I think my concern is when this was discussed in December or whatnot at that meeting that we had then, that it was basically the choice for any future land use must be made on this general plan, and once it's made, it has to stay there. But I'm sensing that it's not ideal to change it, but it is possible.
You're correct.
Sure.
I had a question on something not related to this too. If you want me to keep going, I got a list.
It's still your floor, Haley. What's
All
your
right.
next idea?
So that that thought process brought up another question. And how, with those properties that we no longer have mixed use on, but have commercial only, but we kind of talked about a possible variance if the developer comes forward with housing. It doesn't mean that we immediately say no to it. How do we account for that in our CFP? Possible high density or maybe not? Like, how do we prepare for that?
That's a very good question. From a capacity standpoint, it would be good to probably plan on some. But I don't know how to guess on how much to plan for.
So that might be something to consider.
I think once we get into the capital facilities plans and update them based on the general plan, that would be definitely a point of discussion, and we would want to make sure that we don't undershoot that undershoot that estimation, I should say. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I mean, we could evaluate what kind of excess capacity is adjacent to those, and not so much of a concern on the west end, more of a concern probably on the east end. So we could just see how much of a buffer we think is there, but that would probably end up driving what you could really allow on those properties.
Okay.
And unless the developer wants to pay for some upsizing, but on the east end, paying for upsizing all the way down is not really a feasible cost that they would be able to swallow.
Okay. So going over just the population, do you mind if I know there was some people that were concerned about that as well and wanted to kind of see the follow-up to that. Do you mind if we go over that for just a moment?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I'm not quite sure what line item it is on the clean version that has the population.
Let me pull it up.
Okay.
$185.
Perfect.
You want to look at the numbers, you mean?
Just what changed from the last one. So we were at what, 13.5, and we went down to 12.8, mostly because we removed mixed use out of there, right?
Correct. There was a double check. If everybody remembers, staff was asked to double check the developable ground map and how the numbers were calculated. And so there was a double check on that. And pulling out the mixed use was the biggest difference. This number changed quite a bit. There's still a little bit of mixed use based on the commercial overlay zone that a development proposal is already entitled to. But other than that, most of those numbers are very similar. There was a change in the very low density number that showed 0 acres previously. And so these numbers now match the developable ground map.
Okay. Do you mind just kind of going over what you mentioned to me as far as the capital facilities plan and the developable acreage, whether or not that gets developed, the wisdom and planning for it and possibly not having it come in versus not planning for it and having it come in?
Yeah, you bet. This goes very similar hand in hand to what we've been discussing already with capital facilities plans and what is considered new impact on the current system versus what is an existing deficiency. So there's an underlying assumption that we have systems in place right now that are providing service to current residents. When new development comes in, when new property is developed and new population is now part of the city, their impacts on the system, they pay for through an impact fee. if you don't plan for population and that population comes in, then it shows up more as an existing deficiency in your system. An existing deficiency in your system, the whole city would have to pay for those types of projects. But impact fee projects or impact related projects, those are taken care of by impact fees as development comes in. So it's actually quite prudent to overplan according to population. There wasn't an overestimate, I guess you could say, rather than underestimate, because then you protect the current residents better rather than have that any future projects show up as an existing deficiency rather than related to the impact of new population that comes in. So there wasn't any attempt to try to manipulate these numbers in any way. It was just simply a calculation based on land that is vacant right now, that is undeveloped. However, if there was a question of whether or not it might develop, or if there was easements on it that may or may not go away in the future, we erred on the side of overestimating rather than underestimating, simply to try to protect the current residents so that they wouldn't have to take on undue burden for cost of infrastructure in the future. Does that make sense, or was that muddy answer?
Makes sense to me. Everybody else catch that?
Other questions about that? Yeah, there's more. It's a conservative approach, I guess you could say, to overestimate your population, your build out population. Just like you would budgeting, you be conservative in your budgeting. You budget expenses high and you budget revenues low and hope that you're wrong in both counts. In this case, we're trying to do the same a little bit, that you want to just make sure that you don't end up putting undue burden on current residents by not anticipating what is likely or what could potentially happen. So that's how these population numbers show up. Whenever you look at if you look at the developable land map and there's questions about that, the questions, the way we answered them were, let's anticipate that the easement goes away at some point, if there's a question of whether it would go away, so that we could capture all of that in impact fees in the future.
The only thing I would add to that is just that we aren't really trying to grossly overshoot. We are trying to do our best to estimate where we think it's likely that there may be some development, and accounting for it that way. And then, like you said, if there's a question, then we erred on the side of including it rather than excluding it.
Yeah, good clarification. We weren't trying to overshoot by a lot. We're trying to be as accurate as possible. But if there was a question, then we decided to include rather than exclude. There's a couple hands raised. I didn't see the order. How about we go with Angie?
Okay. So my only question on that would be, if we overestimate, which I appreciate that explanation, does that ever come back to bite us in the end if a developer says, well, your general plan anticipates that you could support a population of X, so we want to ensure that we get that. All of our code is in place to protect us from that, right?
Correct. An individual developer would only be looking at the zoning on their land, and this takes into account what the projected land use map shows. I don't anticipate ever a developer looking at this and saying, oh, that means I get X number of units. That's not how they would think.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
And let me add to that, the purpose of the developable ground map is not to say, hey, this is what a particular landowner or developer is entitled to. It's certainly not that. We are just only trying to anticipate what potentially could be developed to try to calculate what and project, what the future uses would bring into the city. So there's no entitlements there. And that's why the developable ground map is not a part of the general plan. It's just a tool to help get these numbers.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. Rob?
So my question is the build out population was 13 and change, whatever it is, and now it's down to 12,844. Help me understand again what you're talking about, that if that puts a bigger burden on the rest of the citizens, if really our build out population is 13 and change versus the 12, we could possibly get dinged with having to upsize on our own. I guess some question is it wise to lower that number? Because I don't even know if there's a future city council out there, might be, that will say, no, we want more high density. I don't know, but maybe. And so shouldn't we plan for that better?
Well, I would say that we are planning for that. What we've identified, and again, to Brandon's point, is this is simply looking at the vacant land now that has the potential to develop and calculating based on what our projected land use map says. The reason it was 13,000 before is because that included a whole bunch of units on the mixed use land. And so when we pull out mixed use and say we're not planning for mixed use, that was the major difference. So I don't think that we're putting ourselves in any danger with this type of a number. And again, we're not trying to create a number. We're just simply trying to calculate based on the projected land use map and what could potentially develop in the future. There's no real target number here.
I'm just concerned that we get dinged because we were too conservative. That's as a taxpayer. That's just my concern, you know. And we did leave the option open for both site A and B that could possibly bring residential. I don't know. So that's only my concern, but you satisfied my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we had another raised hand. Taylor.
I just had a question about how the Governor's Office of Economic Adjustment might get their numbers, because looking at those, they paint a very different picture of South Weaver. By 2030, they project 14,578. And then past that, by 2050, they're looking at 21,292. Do they look at the same things that we do as projected land use? And I don't know how they got to their numbers, but if we're going to estimate high and miss low, I'm just wondering, does it make sense to go to the Governor's Office of Economic Adjustment and ask the question?
Well, maybe Dave, can I answer that?
Go for it.
The numbers that you see in the general plan are based off of actual ground in South Weaver that appears to have some developability to it. So, and then that is meshed with the anticipated land use. So what we're portraying here, I think, is a really pretty good estimate as to what you'll actually see. Governor's office has no idea of, you know, what our, I mean, they have this, they'll sometimes use our land use maps and things like that, but they haven't gone to near the detail that we have in trying to project what we really think is coming.
I tend to agree that is the case, that we've done the more in-depth analysis of what is buildable, what our build out would be. Those are just very different numbers. I mean, it's more than double. So I just don't know if that would be something that we wanted to talk to the Governor's Office of Economic Adjustment about, or Economic Development about, and say why the big disconnect. And I just don't want it to be in a situation where they're seeing that we have capacity and then we're saying, no, we're half of that. And maybe that's a conversation for another day and not the general plan, but it was just a question that came up when we were talking about where these numbers come from and total build out.
I've made to get in touch with GoEd about that. I'm not sure exactly where they get their numbers, but I'm much more confident in our numbers and how we came to them. not knowing where they got theirs. But we can connect with them at a later time and understand together where they got that from. Hayley?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that we don't, if I'm understanding correctly, we don't want to just overestimate just to be safe, because that really comes back down on our future residents in a way. It comes, from our capital facilities plan to our impact fees to our building permits. So if we don't have growth coming, we don't want to make people have higher building permits than is actually going to happen. But yeah, I would agree with Dave and Brandon that these numbers seem to be pretty close to what is actually available. Maybe a little bit less depending on some places not being able to be developed, but I think that's from the governor's is way off. It is what I would see it as, is they're on the side that's off rather than the other way around, in my opinion.
Yes.
Hey, Dave. I was looking at some of the information from the Wasatch Front Regional Council that they'd published for our population statistics, and they show nothing near what we currently have. They are way low on their projections compared to what we have in the general plan as it is right now.
Can you tell us what their projections are?
I had it put out. I don't have it handy, but it was about 50% currently of what we currently have as a population here. They had it listed as 50% or 3/4 of what we actually had. And their extrapolations out continued at a lower rate through 2050. And when we say that we're going to build out with 12,844, they were, I believe it was about 8,000 for a total build out here.
Sounds like we need to get with GoEd and WFRC on what our population numbers are. So I'll put that as well. Thank you, Wes. Gary?
Yeah, I really think we're worrying too much about these population estimates. I think what you've done, David, is good. I mean, it's based on solid math. It's based on the facts. It's based on the ground available. The governor's office is all about promoting the state and saying, look how many people are going to live here in this state. So theirs are just going to naturally be inflated. These other numbers, I don't, I'm not sure on those, but I think based on, as I read through this, looking at the maps and everything you used, I think it's a really good estimate. But in 5 years, when somebody else goes and looks at the general plan, they're going to have different estimates, and the 2020 census numbers are going to change things. Again, this is just a plan. This is our best guess. It's not set in stone, and somebody's going to change it in the future. But I think for right now, you've done a good job, and I think it's an appropriate estimate of what the build out is.
Thanks, Gary. I don't see any other hands raised. Are there other topics that people have? Any other questions or concerns with how the general plan or maps lay out in preparation for a second round of public comment? Taylor.
I was just looking at the hazard section of the general plan itself, and we see there that we should, let me try to get in front of it. I apologize here. I navigated it away.
I can pull
yeah. Oops. On the wind section, the high winds, I just had a tough time figuring out how we're going to do this. So it says the design standards in high wind areas of the city must account for the amount and level of wind. And how do we go about doing that? Have we identified areas of high wind areas, or do we assume the entire city is that? And what does it mean to ensure that the right design standards are in place for the level of wind that they might experience? It just seemed like a really hard thing to try to put down as a guiding principle of how we were going to approve developments.
Sure. Gary, you got your hand raised. Comment on that?
Yeah, I think with that, it's just basically a reminder that, you know, if you're going to build on the east end, it's windy. And I don't think we have to set specific guidelines, but maybe it's just a reminder to builders. And I think most builders will already know. I don't know if we need to get more detailed than that.
I don't think you need to. It's covered in the building code.
Covered in the building code for all of South Weaver?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
So the general plan doesn't need to address it any farther than it has. It's just kind of, the way I view it is it's just there to kind of notify them, as Gary was saying.
One of the things that I found in the past with the information from the base and the winds up there, Utah State University did a study years ago on the winds coming out of the canyon, and they did extrapolate out to where the strongest winds would be. And I know that there was one developer many years ago that developed some lands up on Canyon Drive on the east end of it up there, that he had to go in and double the size of the studs that he was going to use in the base foundation, because he knew what the winds were going to be. And talking with the individual, he looked to the future and said, yeah, a 2x6 isn't going to be strong enough. And there were certain size that he went with 2x8s instead of 2x6s for his first level of the houses that he was building up there. So, but the wind data is available. Utah State University did publish that quite a few years ago. I think I've got a GIS coverage of it.
Thanks. Sorry, you caught me right as I was taking a drink. Any other thoughts? Wayne?
I have a new subject if we're done with that one.
Okay.
I'd like to move over into the Hill Air Force Base environmental impact. It's lines 369 through 403. Specifically, looking at the statements written on lines 396, it discusses mitigation measures. First, this is all based upon the accuracy of map 5. And I don't want to get into that conversation right now about our plume maps. But here it's starting talking about development in the areas of contamination, and it lists all these mitigation measures. My question is, if these mitigation measures fail, does that absolve the city of any responsibility of providing safety and looking out for safety and health and welfare of the community? Or should we be saying, look, you shouldn't be developing near these areas unless you can prove that there is no contamination or no risk to human life? Here, we're basically saying, well, if you want to build, do some of these things and you should be okay. But these are man-made devices or barriers that are not foolproof. So what are we really telling the community here? It's okay to build next to it if you do these things and we can wash our hands of the city? Because I don't think it does. I don't think it washes the city's hands. I think we need to be more definitive. Don't build, or make sure that there's no contamination before you build. And I just pose that question to the council and the planning commission.
Thoughts?
Wayne, are you concerned that the vapor removal systems would stop working?
The vapor removal systems, the basements, field drains, everything listed there are man-made mitigation measures that are not foolproof. If by chance any one or three of those barriers, if they do all of them, fail, and heaven forbid, somebody becomes ill because of the existing contamination there, who's on the hook for that? It's not Hill Air Force Base. It's going to come back to the city. So why don't we be more definitive and say, look, if you wanted to build next to these plumes, you need to make sure that there's no contamination there, or don't build.
I guess I'm wondering if it would come back to the city. If it was Hill Air Force Base that put in the contamination systems or the vapor removal systems.
You can't sue Hill Air Force Base. But we're the ones that allow the development of a city. If we allow them to go in, we're the ones culpable. So are we putting people in harm's way by allowing them to build next to a plume that may have contamination? Or should we be saying, prove to the city that there's no contamination there before we let you build?
Could we say something like these areas are identified as potential hazardous zones, and we discourage development or discourage housing development in these areas?
Until the plume is mitigated, or I don't know. Because the second part of the question is how accurate is map 5? And that's been a big discussion point to some of our citizens in the community, is those plume maps have been shrinking, but Hill Air Force Base doesn't recognize that, although staff are saying this is the information that's coming from Hill Air Force Base. So I don't know what to believe.
Well, Wayne, going back to your point, if we tell them to prove that there's no contamination before building, and hear me out, is that akin to saying you're guilty until proven innocent, that there absolutely is contamination there and it's unsafe? Because there are identified areas of contamination. So my question is that appropriate for the city to say, prove that there's no contamination before you do that?
In this particular area, it says development in or near these areas, do these things. And I'm saying, why would we want to allow them to do those things if it's going to put the public and future public at risk?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want anybody to be at risk. I'm just wondering what our liability would be if we said that. I feel like the city could, is in a really tough spot with this, because we either tell someone, prove that it's not, and then what does that really look like? Does it look like, how do we say, okay, you got this test from so-and-so who's accredited, how to prove there's no contamination? And on the other side, we have information that shows that these are shrinking. So how does the city know which is accurate? How do we weigh that is my question too.
We got a few hands raised. Gary, then Hayley, then Blair.
So in that same paragraph, the last sentence, it says those living or planning to live above or near the areas of contamination need to familiarize themselves with this information, be aware of issues, associated health problems, and be accountable for their own health and safety. When I bought my house, I knew we were by one of these areas. It was made clear to me, and we made the decision to go ahead. And I think, again, the general plan is just that. It's a general plan. And we're just giving the information there, noting that there are these sensitive areas and possibly hazardous areas. And we need to use caution when building there. And again, anything that's built near these areas is going to go through that whole process. Again, it's not like we're just giving everybody the green light right now to build on them. So.
Hayley?
Gary, what process are you talking about that they would go through?
Well, just if anybody's planning on development, there's the process that goes through the city. Just the review process and all of that.
Do we have a review process for contaminated areas, Dave?
There are requirements for geotechnical studies. Absolutely. We have that. Well, maybe Brandon can speak more expertly to that, but yes, there is a development process where they have to show what's in the ground and all of that. So Brandon, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. There's a section in the code that is the sensitive lands, and there's some references in there to contamination. It does not specifically outline what tests or other things like that we would require. If we felt like that section needs some strengthening, then that would be my suggestion, is that we look at that and see if there's additional things that we want to add in there. But as it stands right now, I feel like we do have in code the ability to require some form of testing or whatnot to try to wrap our heads around a particular piece of property. Right now, the general plan is just broad brush, and what is shown on there with the plume maps is simply what was given to us from Hill. So it would come down to specific developments and having them do additional tests. Although, like I said before, we don't specifically say what those tests would be.
Yeah, our city code is not silent on the issue of contamination and sensitive lands when it comes to development. Blair, you've got your hand up as well.
Hayley, are you done?
Go ahead. I'm chewing on something in my head. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I mean, regarding this, I mean, I completely agree with what Gary said. He said it very well. I don't have a problem with this paragraph. But going back to your question, Hayley, the environmental committee's talked about this several times, Wayne and Taylor and all, trying to decide what kind of testing we do require. So we do need to increase the requirements in those areas. I mean, Wayne, I will disagree a little bit. I do think some of these things can be built with mitigation systems on them. I mean, it's been proven all over the valley or our county that these mitigation systems work. And so I think it can be done, but that's up to the developer to prove and to get Hill Air Force Base's permission to have that. I know that's a whole nother issue as far as Hill Air Force Base permission, but I think this is worded well enough for the general plan that, I mean, I don't think in here, right, in our general plan, we state that you should not build on there. That's my opinion, though. I think we need to just state that there is an issue, that it needs to be addressed.
I appreciate Wayne bringing this up because it's something that I have concerns about as well. I feel like we probably need to maybe have a further conversation, maybe not so much with the general plan, but I do have some concerns about some areas that are coming forward with developments and whether we're doing everything we should be doing as a city to make sure we're protecting our residents. And so I just wanted to throw that in. Perhaps that would be at a better, different meeting, but yeah.
Can I interject there? One of the issues we have talked about as the environmental committee is talking about the radius outside of these plume maps, our map 5. I'm not there yet, and we've discussed how far out do we start discussing that, but is everybody okay with, I mean, I'm not going to ask you if you're okay with the plume maps themselves, but at one time we've been trying to address the radius. How far out do we go to where we're requiring things? Those are some inputs that we need from people. And I don't know where, is that just a separate map we have, Dave, or is that a map that we need to have in the general plan? Do you know which one I'm talking about? That it talked.
I'm not exactly sure which map you're talking about.
There's a map that we have that shows us, it's a sensitive lands map, and then it also shows a ring around this, like Taylor or Wayne, you can interject.
General plan map.
What's
It's
that?
the previous general plan map.
Is it in the previous general plan map?
It was like a 2,000-foot standoff.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, I mean, do we need some kind of radius in there? I mean, we've talked about shrinking that. We've talked about doing a lot of things. Are we okay with the kind of that dotted line right now that we're talking about?
Well, I feel like, Blair, that the red hatch area covers all of that.
That's what I was asking, yeah.
And so I think that gives us all that we need from a code perspective to enforce, I guess, to be able to require additional things in those areas to try to get a better feel for what the contamination is on the particular ground that's being proposed for some development. I'm just suggesting that we may need to go into the code and strengthen a few areas of that. But I feel like the map, I mean, this is my opinion, but I think the map gives us what we need to be able to require those additional studies.
Brandon, I hear you saying that the map gives us the teeth to then require a developer to follow our sensitive lands code. The question is, does our sensitive lands code go far enough? And that,
Yes, right. That's where I feel like we probably could strengthen that. That's my opinion.
okay. Quinn, you had your hand up, and then Rob.
My question may be for a different meeting, but these plumes were generated from extensive sampling testing years ago. And it sounds like that's never going to happen again. And so that's why we keep having this discussion, is because we don't know if they've diminished, if they've grown, if they've shifted. Is that true? The groups that identified these originally are not going to come back and re-identify how bad they are?
Quinn, can I jump in there? These plume maps are updated as far as what, I think they're only like 8 or 9 months ago. They're currently updating these plume maps all the time. The debate is whether they're accepted or not.
And that's the question I get, the argument is they're not accepted by some. What would it take to have them accepted from the 3 groups or whatever that originally agreed that they were accurate? Is that never going to happen?
So currently the 3 groups, the EPA, Hill Air Force Base, and I can't remember who that third group, whether that's just the RAB or not. The EPA and Hill Air Force Base have accepted these plume maps. They have not modified the ROD from 1971, I believe, or whatever it was, or 87. But they have accepted these. This was the ROD review maps that were turned in 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Rob, you've got your hand up.
So basically my question was the same as Quinn's. Is who's responsible to produce this map that everybody agrees to? Is it the city? Is it the Air Force Base? Who is it? And so, and I appreciate Blair's comment, because I wasn't aware that it was a new updated from about 7 months ago. So how do we get everybody on board, I guess? And this is probably a discussion for another day. I totally agree with what Gary said. It's simply this isn't a discussion for the general plan, but we need to have this discussion on another place.
Okay. Angie?
I just wanted to make sure that I clarified. I feel like this is really important, so I just want to make sure that we don't let this just fall through the cracks. So I just kind of want to know what our plan will be to review this. Does the council need to direct staff to review this? Do we need to bring this up as an item on a council meeting or planning commission? How do we make this a priority and address concerns?
How would the council like us to proceed on that? Mayor?
I know we have set up a committee in the past to review those plans, review that contamination. It might be a good idea to have that committee meet again and figure this out.
Reconvene.
Would that committee have?
I believe that was Wayne and Blair. Wayne and Blair were on that committee. Is that correct?
That was correct. And I think Taylor, we had one other person, I can't remember who. It's been a while. We've had other things jumping in the way.
Yes, we have. Does anyone know who the other member was?
I can look that up.
Okay. I think that would be a good place to start anyway.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Getting back up to the high level again. Any other topics, any other issues with the plan as it sits prior to going out for public comment? Hayley?
Dave, oh, sorry, Haley, I didn't raise my hand. Can you, hey,
Go ahead.
after Haley makes a comment, can you explain the calendar to us?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was just gonna make sure that the email that we got from a resident that had some other edits and things that he caught, if we can double check those and see if we need to make those corrections.
I did receive an email that had a list of kind of specific grammatical edits, suggested edits. And so, yes, we'll double check those and make sure that we include appropriate ones. You bet.
Thank you.
You can edit ad nauseum, but there's got to be a point where we stop and put it out to the public.
Yeah. Let me double check here on the timeline that we've previously discussed so that I speak to the exact timeline. I'm just pulling it up here. So the timeline that we were working off of after tonight's meeting, we are going to finalize the maps and the narrative based on the final comments today, or I say final in the fact that we were going to try to get out the survey. We are going to finalize the survey as well. You'll notice if you saw earlier today, there was a request for volunteers from the community to take a preview of the survey itself, look over the questions. We had talked previously about a focus group. We won't be able to get everybody together in a focus group style, but the idea was to send out the survey to a handful of interested residents so that they could simply look at the survey questions and analyze the tool itself, not necessarily for comment on the general plan, but for comment on the survey instrument. So we could have some eyes and ears of the public, provide a little bit of feedback on that. Once we get the survey finalized, we'll obviously send that out via email to the council as well for review, and be able to provide your comments, your feedback, include also the feedback from this resident group. The idea is that we've requested those that are interested to submit their name and contact information. We'll then go through a random selection process. I anticipate we'll have more that are interested than we'll actually be utilizing and utilizing that help. So we will go through this random selection process and have the residents, public look at the survey as well. In the past, we had talked about holding public open houses. Under the current circumstances, the public open houses will not take place. However, we still will put out the survey once it's been vetted and analyzed out to the community during the month of April. And the idea was that we would close the public comment period by the end of April. At that point, we would hold another one of these joint work sessions. We were planning on doing that on May 12th for this group to review the public comments on this second draft, and then work from there. If we needed to go through more rounds of revision based on public comment, we would. If not, and we felt like we were close, then at that point, once we've gone through this cycle, the number of times that we feel necessary, ultimately the planning commission would have a final review and officially recommend to the city council, and the city council has the final adoption of the general plan. So if this was the last iteration of public comment, then we would probably have the May meeting, the joint work session with both groups, In June, Planning Commission could look at it for their final recommendation. And then by the end of June or first part of July, then the city council could potentially have the general plan adopted. Again, depending on how many iterations we go through of public comment that you'd like. So that's our general timeline right now.
All right. Okay, thank you, Dave. Are there any other comments before I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Haley's got her hand up, and then Taylor.
Just a quick question that I got from a resident. Will the opportunity to do the survey on paper copies still be an option?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll work out the details of getting that out. Obviously, electronic version, but we'll also have a paper copy, and how we distribute that, we'll have to nail down those details, considering City Hall is closed to the public right now, but we'll work that out. Absolutely, we want to make sure that there's lots of different formats and options for people. They can use whatever they prefer.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Taylor?
Just real quick, I just noticed on the developable grounds map or developable acreage map that we have mixed use listed. I know it's not going to be in the general plan, but I didn't know if that was going to be put out to the public. Just maybe something to take off the map. We show 2.91 acres available for mixed use at 25 units per acre.
Yes, that is the loft, because that's currently zoned like that. And so we wanted to account for that potential.
Okay. I didn't even see it on the map. So thanks for clarifying. It's hard to read.
Yeah, it's small. You're right. Back to you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you everybody for your participation tonight. If there's no further comment, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Angie, you win. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.